captivating talk on parallels between the practices of Hinduism and Zoroastrianism by Mr. Subhas Rao Malya. Before we proceed, I request you to turn off your cameras and microphones. Have you any questions or comments? Kindly drop them in the chat box. Mirazi Heritage Management is an archiving and research firm with a team of archivists, researchers, consultants, and heritage enthusiasts. We preserve, document, and exhibit hidden treasures, undocumented stories, and untold experiences, providing inheritors and the audience the opportunity to connect and reconnect with legacies, instilling a sense of pride. We specialize in legacy building, documentation of inheritance, conduct archival research, undertake oral history projects, provide curatorial assistance, and preserve heritage material. Bringing to you today's talk, our mentor, Mr. Malya, who is an electronic and chemical engineer at a major public sector oil refinery with a heart and mind filled with bringing out treasures of our heritage. Has taken the plunge to complete degrees in Indian aesthetics, comparative mythology, forts and fortification, Bhakti literature, intangible culture and heritage, iconography, and Indology. Owing to his extensive research in history and heritage, he is a guest speaker at various colleges in Mumbai. He strongly believes in learning as a lifelong process with no age barrier. I welcome you, Mr. Malya. We are honored to have you. While many of you would have received an abstract of the talk, I will take this opportunity to briefly set the context. The Parsi community, being a small minority, has contributed majorly in the development of this country. The practice of non-conversion and the practice of exclusive entry to the places of worship creates a sense of mystery and inquisitiveness around the community. Researchers by linguists, mythologists from the 19th century have discovered many similarities between Zoroastrianism and Hinduism, making many erudite scholars purpose of a common heritage. Whichever side of the coin you stand, the similarities, stories, the rituals are so interesting that they immerse you into the bygone times, into a puzzle where most of the pieces are lost, but the lure to discover one more piece still motivates. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the background to today's talk. May I invite you, Mr. Subhas Rao Malya, to address the meeting.
Thank you, Pranav. I take this. Am I audible? Am I clear, Pranav?
Yes, Malya.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. I welcome all the participants for this talk. I thank you all for sparing your time on a precious weekend. I thank Mirazi for giving me this opportunity. I personally would take this as a learning opportunity, and although the talk would be addressed by me, I'm sure that there are a lot of scholars here, and especially people like Dr. Setna, who can really contribute, I'm sure, in substantially in the content, and people who have a little more information as well as anecdotes connected to this talk can raise their hands. There'll be a break in the middle where you can share something very briefly. Then we would continue the discussion during the question answer session. So I would rather start this talk by sharing the screen for PPT. Let me share the screen. Yeah. So, okay. Parsis need very little introduction. In fact, a saying goes that no Indian can really go through his day without using a Parsi product and without being reminded of the great contribution of Parsis. The gentleman here need no introduction. Maybe for a...
PPT is not visible.
One minute again. Let me share. Okay. Again, let me share full screen. Okay. Is it visible now?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. So as I said, the Parsi community needs no introduction. We have greats from JRD to Poonawalla, who is in a way responsible for giving us a solution in these hard times. So getting straight into this talk, there is some for non-Parsi people, there may be some confusion between the three terms: Zoroastrianism, or followers of Zarathustra, Parsis, and Iranis. So let me just put a slight info on this. Is Parsis are basically the group of Zoroastrians who came to India fleeing a religious persecution back in Persia and landed in a place called Zanjan. Although it's disputed whether they landed first in Zanjan, but then finally they did reach Zanjan, and that landing is commemorated by the Zanjan column. So in the center, if you see, there is a column with the sacred fire symbol of the Parsis, and this is the inscription on the column. And here you see sort of a graphical animated representation of the Parsis meeting King Jadeirana. So this meeting is actually recorded in a book called Qissa-e-Zanjan. The Qissa-e-Zanjan is fortunately available as a free download on the net. So scholars who wish to look into this topic can refer to this book. So most of us know of the story of the milk and sugar, when the kings brought the bowl full of milk, saying that his land was full of people. The Zoroastrians then, the Mobed, or the priest amongst the Zoroastrians, added a handful of sugar to it, saying that this community would mix into the larger community and add the flavor of sweetness to it, which really they have done it in word and spirit. This is, of course, a very well-known myth. What is to be noted that when these guests who landed on the shores of Zanjan had the audience of the king, as usual, the king asked them who they were, where did they came from, who were they, what faith did they follow, what is their lineage. And for this, the Mobed answered in 15 Sanskrit shlokas, saying that they are the worshippers of fire and that they are the followers of Ahura Mazda, etc., etc. And the king then answered them, allowing them to stay in the land in the 16th shloka. So these are the 16 Sanskrit shlokas. Now the little importance of the 16 Sanskrit shlokas is that these shlokas are recited during any Parsi wedding. So again, a little small repetition. Parsis are only Zoroastrians who came to India fleeing religious persecution in the 6th or 7th century AD. So are all Parsis Zoroastrian? Yes. Are all Zoroastrian Parsis? No. Iranians came much later. Are all Iranians Zoroastrians? Question mark. Some of them follow the Islamic faith too. But you will be surprised that if you go to some of the Iranian restaurants, they will still have a photograph of the Prophet Zarathustra, and even the symbol or the sacred symbol, the symbol of the sacred fire. So it's very harmonious in that sense. Okay, Zoroastrianism was one of the oldest religions, especially in the Persian Gulf. It was one of the first monotheistic religions, with the Messiah being Zarathustra. Now, Zarathustra, the word was sort of modified by the Greeks and made into Zoroaster. And that is how the word Zoroastrianism comes through. Now, if you look at the linkages between Zoroastrianism and Vedic Hinduism, if you take the word Zarathustra, Zarat is equal to Herat, which is golden in Sanskrit, and Ustra stands for, in both in Sanskrit and Old Persian, for a camel. Hotra is the main priest in the Vedic times when an yajna was performed. The Persian equivalent would be Zotra. Okay, so when we are talking of Hinduism, here we are talking of Vedic Hinduism. So I want people to realize that what Hinduism that we are majorly following today is Puranic Hinduism, where we worship the Puranic gods, okay, and we have traces of Vedic Hinduism in our rituals. So many of the Vedic gods, like Adityas, Mitra, Varuna, Indra, who are mentioned. Indra has a lot of mention in a lot of the hymns in the Rig Veda. So the initial Veda, you will find mention of these gods. In fact, the Rig Veda, the only feminine divine character is Aditi. So you will find that these gods are not worshipped in popular Hinduism, which is practiced at present. It's more like Ramakrishna or the Vishnu clan, which is more, or the Shaivite clan, which is practiced, and of course the Shakti clan. So these are more of the later gods. So you have to appreciate the fact that religion keeps changing itself or keeps evolving in terms of time. So when we are talking of comparisons, we are talking of comparisons between Vedic Hinduism and initial Zoroastrianism. Okay, so it is believed that there may have been a Indo-Aryan religion, which of course the Westerners would say it's an Indo-Aryan paganistic religion, which was more based on the very similar to Vedic religion, which was practiced in Persia before Zoroastrianism came into existence. And the story goes that Zoroaster himself, Zarathustra himself, was an Atharvan, and he was praying once on the bank of the river when he found a very luminous being on the other bank. And then following that luminous being, the luminous being led him to the God, the single Godhead in Zoroastrianism, that is Ahura Mazda. The word Ahura Mazda it has got a parallel in Sanskrit. Surprising, Ahura is the exact translation of Asura. So words get changed phonetically when they move from one region to other region, or one geography to other geography. A lot of research was done by Max Muller, especially in mythology, and he put it under the theory of disease of language. So now I know a lot of people would say Asura because we have a very, very different image of Asura, because a lot of us would have gone through a very famous comic called the Amar Chitrakatha, and Amar Chitrakatha had its own way of presenting asuras and devas. So here is one of the photographs from Amar Chitrakatha. Obviously, this requires not much of intelligence to know that these are the devas. And if you see the characteristics of the devas, the way they are being, sort of represented here, are they're all clean shaven and fair, while the asuras are darker in skin color. All of them have big mustaches, and even if you see the headgear, if you see, would have certain objects like horns and all that. So this is a very I would say a simple description, illustration, more on the basis of Puranas. Of course, color, why they had a darker color, maybe just to differentiate between the good and not so good. So you will find a lot of stories in the Puranas where the gods are supposed to be always in conflict with the asuras, the gods standing for the principles of right, where the asuras more towards they are more under the influence of the senses or sensual pleasures in various ways. So this is what is the sort of Puranic format of stories. But very surprisingly, the Persian or the more the Zoroastrian mythology, you will find a total role reversal. There you would find the Ahuras or the Asura. The Ahuras are the good, is something which is an embodiment of goodness. Ahura Mazda himself is an embodiment of Asha, the force of good, which there is an opposite force called Druj, which is the force of not so good or evil, which is represented by Angra Mainya. So it's a basic religion which is more on duality in the sense of good versus bad. And I think many of the religions are usually following this sort of format. So there was in the 19th century a very simplistic sort of answer given by many scholars, even today, which is sometimes quoted by scholars like Stella Kramish, and there was a scholar called Dr. L. Mills, who was a scholar in Zenda Avesta. So Avesta is one, it's a script, or you can say it's a language, plus it is the name of the holy book of the Zoroastrians. So Avesta initially was an oral tradition like the Vedas and got written down much later. So as the Vedas are divided into various sections, the Avesta is also divided into gathas, and then the hymns are called yest. So you will find a linguist, which I am not, have found a lot of similarities in the structure, the grammatical syntax, and the formats of these two important religious texts. But I think it would be some linguist who can throw more light on it. Here we are looking at mythology. Being a student, and I repeat, being again a student of mythology, I would look at mythology because mythology is, let us look at the word mythology. Here, when we say mythology, it is a derivation of the Greek word mythos, which means a story which is believed as true by a group of people. The normal English usage today of the word myth is a tall tale. But here, whenever I am referring to myth, I'm referring to it as a story which is believed to be true by a group of people. Now, the beauty of mythology is one, that mythology is part of what is called a myth, symbol, ritual continuum. So if you have, and if you see in our life, the life milestones, whether it is an entry into a faith, whether it is coming to adulthood, whether it is marriage, or whether it is the final journey of death, every religion will have their own particular rituals. And these rituals will involve certain symbols, and if you dig deeper, you will find a myth as to why this ritual is carried out in a certain process, why certain symbols are employed. So people like Malinowski and Fraser, who were these mythologists or mythologist theorists in the 18th century, came up with a lot of theory on this. So let us now look at how were the practices, or how was this religion practiced, and what are the similarities between the practice of Vedic Hinduism and ancient Zoroastrianism. So like the Vedic Hindus, the Zoroastrians too refer to gods like Mitra, Vayu, Varuna, and Behram. Now Behram here is again a equivalent of Vrutragna. Now Vrutragna, if you remember, there was this demon or asura called Vrutta, who was supposed to have taken away the waters from the earth. And it is Indra who fought with him and brought the waters back. So we may come back to this story after some time. The prayers or the rituals in Zoroastrianism are called yashna, which is again equivalent to the word yajna. And if you see, fire and water becomes very important elements in both the Zoroastrian and Vedic Hinduism. So most of the Vedic rituals involved yajna, and we know basically Parsis are well known for their prayer with fire. That's why they have this fire temple. One other very similar thing is in Hindus, the Brahmins were the male Brahmins were a sacred thread. So there is a ceremony which marks the end of their education, and then they wear a sacred thread. Even in the Zoroastrian community, when a child is inducted into the faith, they wear a thread. Now, it is not worn across the shoulder like how the Brahmins wear it. In fact, when a child is inducted into the faith, there are two important elements that he has to wear. He has to wear a sadra, which is a very light inner shirt, a thin inner shirt, and a kasti, which is made of woolen threads, and that is tied around the waist. Now, the beauty of Zoroastrianism is from the very inception, I would say it is a very general, gender equal religion, or a very gender equal faith. And this ceremony of, donning the sadra and the kasti is called a Navjot. And this is performed for both the male and female child. So here, when we're talking about the sacred thread, immediately we know that we are talking about Brahmins. So in the Zoroastrian mythology, now I would remind all the scholars or all the people who are interested that if they're interested in Zoroastrian mythology, it's very, very easily available thanks to one of my teachers, Dr. Karanjia. He has a website and a blog in where you can go and He has put down all these myths, so you can read about these myths. Like our epics, the Ramayana and Mahabharata, the Persian epic is called the Shahnameh. Although it has been written very lately, like the 10th to 11th century AD, the Shahnameh is actually, if you translate it, is called the Book of Kings. And one of the very, very important king in Zoroastrianism is Raja Jamshed. And again, when I say that Zoroastrianism is one of the oldest organized monistic messianic religion in West Asia or the Persian Gulf, I know, and if you see the myth, the Shahnameh talks of a sort of flood myth. What is a flood myth? We all have heard of Noah's Ark. Noah's Ark is very, very famous. Okay? So similarly, God instructs Jamshed to collect the male and female species of plants and animals and good people and to build something like an ark, which is called a vara. The description of how large the vara is, in fact, it almost encompasses a city, is all given in the book Shahnameh. And because in the Persian area, it's very difficult to expect rain and then flooding. So it's a heavy snowfall where, every sort of vegetation perishes. And then, as usual, when everything is sort of destroyed, and then a new kingdom is set up on this land. And the day Raja Jamshed is coronated, or he sits on the throne, it's supposed to be a new day, and that is why the Parsi New Year is also called Jamshedji Navroz. Okay, so Jamshed being a very, very important king, he has a reign of more than some 700 to 800 years. And I was telling you the story, he has about 3 to 4 sons, one of whom being very intelligent, learned, and a thirst for knowledge. One son being very strong, extremely proficient in the art of warfare. The third son being very innovative when it comes to agriculture and being a craftsman. So then God instructs that the society be divided amongst the 3 sons, or more, so that the lineage of the sons would then take up a very similar profession. So you have 3 divisions or 4 divisions of the society, which is mirrored by our occupational divisions that happen in Hinduism, which is more called as Varna, or the caste system of the Brahmins, the Kshatriyas, and we all know the other caste. We also know that Hindus are very famous as cow worshippers. Okay, it's on the West, it's like holy cow. Okay, in Zoroastrianism, either during Navjot or during your marriage, this ceremony is not complete without the person, that is the groom and the bride, or whatever it may be, has to sip cow urine. Now, this is also done when a person joins priesthood or becomes a priest. So he has to sip cow urine. Now, it's just not any cow urine. It is a urine of a totally white cow, a totally white, spotless cow. So just take it on a lighter side. It's not with full respects to all religions, but what the joke is that if you have a full white spotless cow, please contact the nearest Agyari. You'll be highly appreciated and rewarded also. Many linguists feel that Sanskrit and Avesta are dialects of a same language. Could be possible because the Mobed who spoke to Jadeirana was very conversant in Sanskrit. So this is possible. So we're talking about the divisions in society as per occupation. The priest, there is a hierarchy of priest in the Zoroastrian faith. The Erward is the, I would say, the lowest rung of priesthood is Erward, followed by Mobed, and Mobed is followed by Dastur. As Dastur is actually a person who has learned the whole of Avesta, and he can pass a judgment on religious questions. He can advise, and he can even advise the ruler. In India, we have the Vada Dastur at present, Dasturji Khurshid Dastur. He is called the Vada Dastur, or he is, you can say, virtually the pontiff or the head priest. The picture on this side is the Atharnon Madrasa. Now, if you remember Hindu mythology, Prajapati Brahma has a male progeny called Atharvan, whom he gives the ultimate knowledge, and who is also the one of the first priests to perform a yajna and to tend the fire. And again, I said that in yajna, the main priest is called Hutur. Atharnon is virtually can be compared to Atharvan. Hutur is again priestly class. So I can see the comparison. Again, I would say this is the Dardar Atharnon Madrasa, I think, which is a unique institution, and this is, I think, the only institution in the world where children from the Atharnon class of society, like the Brahmins, who are inducted to being the priest. Very unique institution, and that is why Dr. Karanjia is an principal there. Dr. Karanjia, and a very helpful scholar, and I think this is for the best resource place if people would like to do some further research in the subject. So coming back to the term Asura. Although the Puranic stories talk of Asura as compared to demons, so Ravana is an Asura, so is Hiranyakashipu an Asura. But in Vedic times, Asura meant a great, intelligent person or a great warrior, also a great leader. So even Indra has been referred to Asura in a lot of places. In the Rig Veda, Asura Madha is Lord of Wisdom. You can straight away translate it to Ahura Mazda. The Avesta speaks of Sapta Sindhu, what we call as Indus Valley, and they even have something called as matra, which are incantations to be uttered during meditation, which is equivalent to mantra. So a lot of words, you'll get a list of words, and there's a list of even hymns which are which have a lot of common between the Rig Veda and the Avesta. You'll get a lot of them, but again, I said I would leave that subject to linguists and not go into it. I was talking about Raja Jamshed, one of the very, very important characters in the Shahnameh, and this is the image or the drawing of him in the Shahnameh. So this is how it looks, and this is what is called the Nowroz table. Now, you'll be very surprised to know that Nowroz is not only even today celebrated not only by the Parsis, but even in many of the Central Asian countries like, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, even though they follow the Islamic faith, they do celebrate Nowroz, and they also set up a Nowroz table. The difference that I have sort of asked people, and what they have informed me is the difference is the Nowroz table. I will tell you, it has got a lot of items which start from the word S. The word S in Avastha. So very difficult to pronounce. You can look up at the net. Usually it will have a photograph of the Messiah Zarathustra. It will also have sort of a vessel in which the shoots are growing. So very much a fertility symbol, like how the Gujaratis have during Navratri. It will also have a glass of wine. Now, in Raja Jamshed's story, you will find that one of his maids has a skin disease and she's shunned by society and she wants to commit suicide. And in the cellar of Raja Jamshed's palace, there is some fruit which has been discarded. It has been kept in certain vats and it has deteriorated, and she thinks it's going to be poison, and she drinks it only to awaken next day to find that she's cured. And then she goes back to Raja Jamshed and tells what has happened, tells about the event, and from that day alcohol is sort of given some sort of medicinal value, and that is why that glass of wine is kept. Remaining you'll see fruits and other things that are kept on the Nowroz table. Now in Islamic countries like from Central Asia, you will find this wine being replaced by the Quran. And you'll also find the photograph of Zarathustra missing, obvious reasons, because they do not believe in idolatry. Okay, so going to myths, and that's what I think I'm a little better at. So myths, if you find that there is a course of comparative mythology at the Department of Sanskrit, University of Mumbai. I would really recommend a lot of the participants who have not done this course to do it. It's a very beautiful course. So when we talk about comparative mythology, we compare the archetypes or the similarities between myths across cultures. And the beauty is that even an isolated community will have a similar type of myth than what is with which they share with a community which is highly connected. So you may find a myth from New Zealand, which was sort of remote, or the Native Americans, or what you call as Red Indians, have a myth which can be compared with a myth from maybe India. Why? There was no connection. Why? Because the human needs being the same, the desires, the fears being the same. Just for a second, imagine you are a prehistoric person, and you're a prehistoric person, and suddenly in mid-afternoon the sun disappears. You have never heard or seen a solar eclipse, but you are intelligent enough to know that your whole survival depends on the sun, and the sun has disappeared. It's going to create panic, chaos, fear. And you're not sure whether this will last for eternity. And suddenly, after some moments, the sun appears. Oh my God, thank you, that's beautiful. And then to explain this, the people came with their own stories. So you will find myths across the world talking of animals trying to go and swallow the sun or the moon. Very similar to Rahu Ketu, the sort of format being the same, then you have a backstory added to it. So the backstories may differ, but the archetype will somewhere match. So here, when people like Sigmund Freud, the father of psychology, when he wanted to analyze myths in his way, more like psychoanalysis of the myths. So he came up with a very famous theory of the Oedipus complex. So everybody knows must know the Oedipus complex. It's the son killing the father. He had his own logic to say that it was for the attention of the mother. The father was this competitor, and the son would then always has a desire to eliminate competition. But if you look in the context of Indian mythology, you will find an absolutely opposite happening, and which theorists have called as Yayati complex. Now, if you remember Yayati, a descendant of Shukracharya. Now, again, Shukracharya is an acharya for the Asuras also. So, Yayati, for whatever he is cursed and he can't enjoy youth, and then he does penance, and he's told that if he can switch his old age with youth, if he can switch it with one of the sons, he'll still enjoy the sensuous pleasures. He goes around asking his sons, and everybody except his younger son refuses, and you know the story how it goes. Or it's more famous is the story of Bhishma and the Bhishma Pratigna, who says he would remain a bachelor because that was a condition for his father to get married. So in the Indian mythological context, the Yayati complex is that the son, in a father-son relationship, a son goes through some suffering just to fulfill the father's desire or to uphold his promise, like how Prabhu Ramachandra has gone to Vanavas, so that his father's promise is upheld. So you will find this sort of format very consistent. Now we are looking at two figures. Now this is not Hanuman, this is Makhardwaja. Makhardwaja, and this is a depiction of Rustam and Sora. Now the story goes, Makhardwaja's story is a little not so popular, so I will just say a few words about Makhardwaja. So Makhardwaja, when there is a war between Ravana and Rama, and when Ravana is more on the losing side, he calls his brother Ahiravan, who is in the netherworld. He calls him to help him. And Ahiravan is a tantric, he's a magician who can change forms. So Ahiravan is ready to attack Ram. And this news goes to Ram camp, and then they also know that Ahiravan can come in any form. He can enter the tent even like a mosquito. So who will protect the tent? So Hanuman is kept as the guard. And then when Hanuman is standing guard, Vibhishana comes in. Now he is not the real Vibhishana, but Ahiravan in shape of Vibhishana. Now Hanuman wants to stop him and do a security check, but he sorts of fools Hanuman by saying that I don't have time, I have got something very important to convey to Rama. So Hanuman very reluctantly, but he allows Vibhishana inside, and Vibhishana is not Vibhishana. He goes inside, changes his form, comes back to Ahiravan form, and carries both Rama and Lakshmana to the netherworld by boring a tunnel through the ground. After a few moments, Hanuman realizes this and finds this tunnel and realizes that he has been fooled. Hanuman, being the ultimate devotee of Rama, enters the tunnel to rescue Rama and Lakshmana. Halfway through the tunnel, he finds another guard there, guarding the way in the tunnel, obstructing his journey. And he is a young boy. Hanuman tells him to get aside. He says, "No, I am here to stop you." And both of them have a terrible wrestling match. And Hanuman is surprised that this young boy is so capable of wrestling him. Usually nobody is able to wrestle with Hanuman. And he feels sorry for the young boy because Hanuman knows that he has to kill the young boy to go ahead. So finally, Hanuman prevails. The young boy is about to die, and Hanuman asks him, "You are so talented, so courageous. I really salute you. Who you are? What is your lineage?" And Hanuman is shocked to hear when Makardhwaja says, "My father is Hanuman." So Makardhwaja did not realize that he is actually fighting with his father, or maybe realized, but duty was above relationships. So Hanuman is shocked because he is a brahmachari in Indian Ramayana. So there are many versions of Ramayana. Today is not Ramayana, so we'll not go into it. So then Hanuman realizes that when he had set Lanka on fire and he was crossing the sea, one of his sweat drops had fallen into a mouth of a makara, a crocodile, and from whom Makardhwaja was born. So Hanuman grants him a boon that in a wrestling akhada, a traditional wrestling akhada, there is always a murti of Hanuman. There would also be a murti of Makardhwaja to remember him, to immortalize him. Now, very simple, coming back to the story of Rustam and Saurabh. Because I told you mythology is a sort of a vessel which contains the ethos, the ethics, the sort of moral values of a faith or a culture. So both Saurabh and Rustam are very brave warriors, great wrestlers. In fact, Rustam is referred to as the shield of Persia in Shahnameh. Saurabh is from Persia. He goes to Tatar or Turkey, and then he marries a princess there. And from when she's pregnant, he has to come back to Persia. So he gives that princess a gem, a very precious gem. And he says that when her child is born, tie this gem to the shoulder of the child so that I will recognize that he is my child. Years pass by and the child grows up, is Saurabh. Rustam and Saurabh have no contact. They have not met each other until Saurabh goes to an incident in life. I don't want to expand this story. And he asks his mother who his father was. His mother has never told who his father was. And then mother says to Saurabh, "You are the son of Rustam." So he goes in search of Rustam from Tatar, Turkey. He comes to Persia with his army. He attacks Persia. So the Persia is ruled by a king, Kekavas. So Kekavas finds that most of his senior brave generals have been defeated or killed by Saurabh. So he has no choice but to send Rustam. Rustam goes to confront Saurabh, and when they meet each other, Saurabh asks him, "Who you are? Are you Rustam?" "I have come in search of Rustam." Now Rustam thinks this is a tactic, and Rustam doesn't want to put all the cards on the table. He doesn't want to reveal his identity. So he doesn't reveal his identity, and it is said that Saurabh and Rustam fight for about 3 days. And initially, Saurabh sort of puts Rustam to the ground. He pins him to the ground. And is about to stab him. Rustam says that according to the culture of Persia or the culture of the land, when the first time an opponent is thrown to the ground, he is given a chance. He is not attacked. Saurabh believes this and lets Rustam go. Now Rustam is very disturbed. He has never been, thrown to the ground in wrestling. and he is very disturbed. At the same time, he feels very sorry for this young gentleman. He says this young gentleman has got a whole life in front of him. And unfortunately, Rustam feels that he has to kill him. Again, next day, the match sort of resumes. And this time, Rustam is able to pin Sorab to the ground. When he pins Sorab to the ground, Rustam immediately stabs him. And Sorab is surprised. He said, I thought you would not stab me. I said, this was what you said, the rule of the land. You have cheated. He says, I'm not so bothered about you cheating me. But he says that, in the 3 days, even I have found respect for you because you are such a great wrestler. And now I'm sorry, not because I am going to die. I am sorry because you are going to die because my father is Rustam, and Rustam will never tolerate that, his son is killed by treachery. And that is when Rustam really realizes, and then he rips apart his armor and clothes and finds the gem tied to the shoulder. And of course, it's a very sort of emotional ending to the story. So you will find, although, again, I will tell Zoroastrianism, being one of the ancient religion of the Central Asia or the Persian Gulf, having this story, the initial story of the flood myth or the predecessor of Noah's Ark, has a story which is following the Yayati complex and not the Western propagated Oedipus complex. So maybe one of these connections to, again, a similarity. And like Sorab and Rustam, like Makardhwaj and Hanuman, being wrestling gods, Sorab and Rustam are again models for Iranian wrestling. And here I would like to sort of take a small break here from a monotonous talk and like you to see a video. Okay. I'm not sure. I didn't not technically. I'm sorry to if I can hear the volume. If it's not hear the volume, or if you cannot see the video, please Neha or Pranav, please alert me. Yeah.
Audible and visible.
Now you see this person. This person is a singer. Now this is a Zurkana. Zurkana is also, it is, I'm not getting the Persian word, it is a word for Mitra's temple, Mitra Varuna, Mitra's temple. Okay, and here where is the wrestling is practiced. Now this person is singing the Shahnameh. So the Shahnameh is not really taken, although it's as a religious text, it is taken more as an Iranian tradition. So here this person, he is playing a drum and he's actually singing the story of Sorab and Rustam from the Shahnameh. And here you will see these are the paintings which are copy from what is from the original Shahnameh by Firdausi. So you will find this, even this is a latest video, 2016. So you will find this story and this sort of its epic being still followed to this day. So here I would like to take a small break and welcome some questions or any comments on the topic. So just break the monotony before we go to the next section. Any questions? Pranav, have you got any comments or questions? Hello? Neha, hello?
We have a question from Mr. Abhay Pai, who has asked what's the name of the high priest. Am I audible?
Very much audible. The name of the high priest is Khurshid, I think Dastur Khurshid ji. See
It's a Hotra or whether it's a Hotra.
it's Hotra in Sanskrit and Sotra in Old Avestan. At present, it is Dasturji. Dasturji. At present, there are priests are divided into Erwad, Mobed, and Dastur. Okay, and there is this Vada Dastur. Which is because they speak Gujarati, it is Bada Dastur. And of course, there was a title called Dasturane Dastur. Now, Dasturane Dastur has never been used in India. Maybe because the Dasturane Dastur was in charge of the Iran Shah. The Iran Shah is actually the king of Iran, or which is actually the first fire, the major fire, which is Iran Shah, and it is so that is why we do not, until now, we do not have a Dasturane Dastur.
Hello.
Question is from Jayashree Das. Was there any god like Rudra in Zoroastrian?
No, Zurudra is not mentioned. Indra is mentioned, and I'll come to that. Indra, Mitra, Vayu, Varuna is mentioned, but Rudra I have not come across it.
Do you want to continue a discussion with Dr. Zareen Seth now, or do you want to
No, I will just at end of it. I'll just run to the remaining, and then we'll end it. Yeah.
We
Yeah.
don't have any more questions. Would you like to continue with the presentation?
Yeah, I would. Thank you. Wow. Is the screen available?
Yes,
You can.
it is.
Okay. Yeah. So this was the Navjot ceremony that I was talking to. Rituals also change with time. See, nowadays we don't have sort of huge yagnas like before. Like there was a Vajpaya Yagna or the Vajpaya Yagna, and people who performed the Vajpaya Yagna were given the surname Vajpayee. So you know now where our ex-Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee gets the surname from. So we have even lost the, I would say, the whole procedure for that, Yagna, plus we don't, the certain things would not be available for Yagna, like the Soma Yagna. But the Soma Yagna was performed by Soma, which was an extract of the Soma plant, and it was it was the favorite for Lord Indra. So if you wanted rain, you would have Soma Yagna done, because once you crushed Soma, Indra was, it's his favorite drink, so he would come down and blah blah blah. So you have a similar. Soma is called as Homa Yashna in the Zoroastrians. Now, this is Navjot ceremony. I said it is very gender equal. You will find that both the boy and the girl are wearing that thin shirt So it's called the Sadra, and this is the kashti which is about to be tied. Okay, and next is if you see the wedding rituals. Now these rituals are actually windows into a lot of, as I told you, symbols, myths, and a lot of connections also. So here you will find that the bride's family welcoming the groom's side. So I think which is very, very, part of our Indian tradition, and now I think sort of made very prominent in Bollywood culture. This one, the haldi. You will find that haldi ceremony. Now I'm not sure, and I know maybe Dr. Setna can tell me whether this haldi ceremony was there before or it has adopted. See, now what happened was when King Jaderana sort of welcomed the Parsis, he put certain conditions. One of the condition was that there would be no conversion. And I think there is no conversion amongst the Parsis even now. Number two, that because of this rule, it is exactly why that the people, non-Parsis are not allowed into the fire temple. And I would like to say that like Hindus, if you go to a ancient South Indian temple, people are not allowed inside the Garbhagriha or the Sanctum Sanctorium. Even Parsis do not enter the space where the fire is. And not every priest attends the fire. The fire is attended by a fire dastur. So even in South India, you will find that although there are a lot of priests, running around in the temple duties, there are only few senior priests who are allowed to enter the Sanctum Sanctorium and do the Abhishekas and all that. So you will find that in Tirupati or a lot of South Indian temples, you will find this practice. So Haldi here, this is the groom's setup sort of with the headgear. You will find a coconut, and this I am not sure whether the coconut, although the coconut will have swastik. Now, swastik was a shared symbol by not only Indo-Iranian cultures, but a lot of cultures. So, swastik was, of course, made famous or infamous because of its use by so-called Aryan Nazis. So, it's a topic which we don't want to cover. But you will find this: the groom actually enters the hall with the coconut in hand. So here you will find a very, very similar antarpat, which Maharashtrians call as antarpat. You will find an antarpat here. And if you see this, you will see people carrying, holding a thread. Now this thread is around the couple. So it makes a sort of a boundary or a kshetra where the actual ceremony is taken place. And you will find this among some Maharashtrians, but in my community which I belong to, that is Gaud Saraswat Brahmin, this is exactly the same practice, exactly same. So we have the nearest relatives holding this, the thread is wound again and again, round and round, until it forms a sort of a barrier. So very, very similar practices. And of course, you will find one of the promises that they gave was the ladies would wear an Indian dress. And hence you will find Parsi women wearing saris. Now this is a Parsi Kara. It is it's a hand embroidered and it's a very beautiful textile, very expensive, and they are virtually heirlooms. They're handed from mother to daughters. So you will find the bride usually wearing this ghara sari. And this, I think, again, this is how traditions change geographically. Now, the sari coming into picture because of their promise. And again, something that is a latest invention, but now become a part and parcel of the wedding ritual or the wedding food ritual, will be laganna custard. It is called laganna custard, and it is almost become mandatory to be served in any wedding. So if you get an invitation for a reception of a Parsi wedding, please attend, because you will be able to taste beautiful Laganna custard. Now, when I was talking to one of my Parsi friends and we were talking about this promise and all that, he in fact put me a bouncer because one of the promises was that the Parsis would not take up arms. And with the most respectful Sam Bahadur, Field Marshal Manik Shah was a Parsi. So I think, yes, certain things are, when there's a conflict between two rights, you'll go for the bigger right. Okay. And just ending with one very, very interesting, our ritual. This is the Behram Puja. Now, most of the people think that Parsis are fire worshippers, but they also worship water. They call it Aban, like Apaha in Sanskrit. And this is the Bikaji Behram well, which is very near to Churchgate Station. I think Cross Maidan ka corner mein, this is there. It was open. I have gone there. It was open to public until a few years back, until one non-Parsi tried to drown himself into that well. And then he was pulled out, and because he was very poor and because of his miseries, he was given financial assistance. This well was purified, and then after that, it has become an restricted entry for non-Parsis. So there is a particular month in which they do the Behram Puja. This is a very familiar picture that Hindus would really, connect to. This is the Satyanarayan Puja. Satyanarayan Puja is one of the, I would say, the latest pujas in Hinduism. Okay, and Satyanarayan Puja is one of the main component of a Satyanarayan Puja is a story. So here is the priest who tells a story of that Kalavati to the Yajman. The Yajman is the person who is performing the puja. And Satyanarayan Puja is done for anything when you want to do auspicious. You're opening up, you're going to a new house, or people do it regularly, or you are, after the marriage, you're starting a new family. So you have a Satyanarayan Puja. So for anything auspicious, you have a Satyanarayan Puja. One of the most important component is the Katha or the story, which is supposed to be heard by the Yajman and his family, the people, the family who is performing the puja. Now there is an equivalent Behram Puja. Again, I said Behram is Indra. Behram Puja, again, Indra stands for fertility, prosperity. So Behram Puja is done by Parsis even during auspicious occasions. Now, you know that the number of Parsis are dwindling for various reasons. Last census, 2011, there were just about 60,000. I'm sure if there was a census in 2021, they would have, if they had touched 50,000 or below, they would have become a tribe. They would have become a scheduled tribe. Because that is the legal definition of a tribe, is when the people are of that community are less than 50,000. So there is a lack of people. So who would be the priest and who would be listening, blah, blah, blah. So like the Satyanarayan Puja is exactly a story in the Behram Puja. The story of the Satyanarayan Puja is very simple. It's a carrot and stick story, which I know if I take a little liberties and not hurting religious sentiments, I would say it's a carrot and stick story, that there's a very poor man and then he prays and then God gives him richness. For some reason, down the line, when he's become rich, he forgets to pray, and then it goes back to bad times. And this cycle of good times and bad times keep changing. Prayer, not praying, good time, bad time. It goes through this cycle. There's a similar story, and the story's name is Mushkin Asan. Mushkin is that woodcutter who is very, very poor, and then his daughter wants to eat is a fragrant biryani which a neighbor is preparing. So she makes an excuse and goes to the neighbor and says that I have shortage of firewood, not just normal firewood, but a wood that is put into the holy fire. So the neighbor gives the girl a little bit of wood to be put in the holy fire. Again, after some time, she goes back. Her intention is not to get firewood. Her intention is that she'll be invited to taste that biryani. But the neighbors refuse. She goes there repeatedly, and then the neighbor says, "We know what you are trying to do. You're not running out of firewood. You actually want to taste the biryani, but we're not going to give it to you." So she comes back and she cries, and she's in a very sad state. And the father comes and he listens to this story. So he says a promise that I'll see that tomorrow I'll cut more wood so that I can give you biryani. It goes on, goes on. He's unfortunate for 3 days. He's just not able to cut any wood because there's a forest fire. And then when he's totally dejected. He sees Behram, and Behram gives him some earth, some mud, which he goes to the house and throws it at the corner. Next day, it has become beautiful gems, lustrous diamonds, and he becomes rich. So same cycle, when he becomes rich, something happens. His daughter forgets to do the prayers, and then this story repeats, not with one, but with many examples. So very, very similar carrot and stick story. In a Hindu tradition, it is the priest telling it to the Yajman. The Yajman is supposed to listen it. Now, because of lack of population, they have innovated. So a Parsi person, and I would like Dr. Setna to correct me. This is what a lot of my Parsi friends have told me. So when they do the Behram Puja, or it's part of the tradition now, that when they tell the story, they keep a mirror in front of them, which means that my reflection is the audience. The story has certain pauses. Okay? To ensure that the listener is attentive, it has got certain pauses. And when the storyteller pauses, the listener has to say Ji Re Ji. Yes, I am here, I'm listening. He says Ji Re Ji. Now, when you're doing it all alone and you're keeping the mirror in front of you, you're telling the story, you pause at the right time, you look into your own reflection in the mirror and say Ji Re Ji. So you see how a tradition has been modified, to make it more practical. So I think I would call this a very, very beautiful innovation. And with this, I would really like to end this talk. This topic is very, very wide, very, very huge. In fact, me and Mirasi do take Parsi heritage walks especially at the Dadar Parsi colony and South Mumbai. So whenever we plan that, I'm sure Mirasi will inform you. And my small request, a very humble request to scholars is, I've seen a lot of groups taking heritage walks in the Parsi colonies or the bags. And they then telling them there are so many stories more, and they're telling them the stories, and then the participants who come very enthusiastically trying to peep into some homes. And I have come because I have many friends in this, especially in the Dadar Parsi colony, and they feel a little offended. But Parsis being that very polite, they would tell their even their voice their sort of concern or whatever in a very polite way. See, nobody wants to be looked down, as a sort of a art object in a museum, or something to be as a curiosity object. So whenever we are doing research, or whenever we are not allowed to enter the fire temple. So certain questions when you're asking, when you're doing any research or anything, so please be sensitive to the community, give them their due respect, respect their traditions, respect the whatever promises they are given. Don't try to sneak in someone with a tell your friend with a camera, put on your mobile. I know some researchers have done that. Don't do these things. Give that community the due respect, whichever community it is, and especially Parsis, they have immense contribution to this country. So with respect to the Parsi community, the contribution to the country, I would like to end this talk and open it for questions and discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Malya. That indeed was enthralling. And now we proceed with the discussions. And if anybody who wishes to address the speaker, please unmute yourself, introduce yourself and ask away. All right. Thank you. Anybody?
Hello, Mr.
Hello, good evening. I'm Dr. Zareen Setnath. May I speak?
Yes, go ahead, Dr.
Please, madam.
First, thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for this very beautiful. It was a long-awaited speech since the time Neha told me about it. We've been waiting to hear it, and thank you very much. Thank you very much. It means a lot. Personally, as a Parsi, it means a lot, but as a student of social science, also it means a lot. So there are two things I would like to point out. One regarding that promise of not taking up arms. The promise made to the King Jadhav Rana. That was, sir, that we will never take up arms against this motherland. Okay, and we will always defend motherland. So when people like respected Sam Manekshaw and many others who have followed the tradition of being in Indian Armed Forces, we have actually followed the tradition and kept the promise of defending the motherland. So not taking up arms was simply not taking up arms against India. Okay, it was never, but for India, yes, of course. Okay. Secondly, sir, regarding Bada Dastur, yes, I'm very glad coming from you, sir, when you give us hierarchy of Edward, Mohammed, and Dastur. That's absolutely accurate. As far as Bada Dastur is concerned, sir, Zoroastrians don't have this concept of one single Bada Dastur. Like you have a Pope in Christianity who is the top person. Zoroastrianism, in fact, we have many Bada Dasturs, and all of them are at equal stature, Like in India, we traditionally used to have a system of having 7 Bada Dasturs. So it used to be a council. And whenever the religious question arose, all of them, reach a consensus. Over a period of time, due to dwindling population and many not, qualifying to become Dastur now, it's a very, very tough process. So youngsters, very few are ready for the process and rigor. And therefore, now it has come down to 5 Bada Dasturs. Of course, the one you mentioned, sir, at Udwada, of course, because he's tending to the Iran Shah at Udwada, his stature is slightly more. But as such, from religious point of view, no single person is higher than that. They are at par. But I enjoyed it. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Setna, because, this was a question I had asked some people and I got conflicting answers, but I think your answers are very, very clear and I'll keep it in mind. So in the future, I'm very sorry for my, wrong interpretation.
Oh, no. Please don't apologize, sir. Absolutely don't. Absolutely.
But I will keep it in mind and thank you for updating me. I always consider this as a learning process. So thank you. I have learned something.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Nice learning. By the way, there is also some history which is there where Varyavas were there before Sam Manekshaw or the Indian army came into the picture, and before India got united. There was an Afghan conquest which was coming, and they had to take arms for the king of Gujarat, Jadhav Rana and his descendants. And we have taken arms quite a lot of times. And the Varyava massacre is also quite famous. You should look into it. I think you'll have a lot of literature on that as well.
There is a beautiful myth about this Varyave Jang, we call it, Jang meaning war. Thank you, Ruzbe, for bringing this up. And it is believed that in Varyave Jang, a lot of Parsi men participated and fought alongside their Gujarati men to defend against a conquering Muhammad Ghori, if I'm not making a mistake, but some Muhammad is mentioned. We really don't know which Muhammad that person was in Kisse Sanjan. But apparently the story narrative goes that a time came when a lot of men were killed. And when men were killed, then we really don't know what to do. So then Parsi women dressed up as men, tied their hair in turban, and they actually went on horsebacks and they started fighting very, very courageously, And they continued with the fight, and the opponent army was not even aware that they're actually fighting against women because they were all shielded under the armor. And apparently one woman soldier fell off from the horse and her turban fell off and that long hair was exposed. And that's when, the opponent army was very ashamed that, oh my God, for so long we've been fighting with women and literally being defeated by them. So that valor is, depicted over there. We call it as Varyave Jang. Yeah, that's a beautiful anecdote you came up with. Yeah.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Mr. Umregar and Dr. Sitna. Thank you very much, sir. Yeah.
So, anybody has any more questions? Please feel free to ask. Um, anyways, I do have a question from my end to you, Malyaji. You spoke about Hinduism and the similarities and the differences with the Parsis and the Zoroastrians in India. Could you talk about a little more about the Zoroastrians in Iran and the various differences with the Parsi community of India?
Unfortunately, I had to restrict my research to speaking to people in India, but I can still try to answer the question to the best of my abilities, because one of my dear friends and her husband, they just lately traveled to Iran just before the lockdown on a religious tour. So, and that lady was telling me that, of course, I had also the fortune of putting a small donation in the Iran Shah there. So the lady was telling that there are, if you see a lot of vehicles, cars in Iran, irrespective of what faith they are actually following, you will have that Parsi bird type symbol. So I think it's called farmahas. I may be pronouncing it wrongly. They will have this symbol. So many people externally they may be following some Islamic traditions, but in home they are following a lot of Parsi traditions. Now this can be a sort of an amalgamation also. I can only give you a very loose example here. Like if you go to Malad and you will find some East Indian Christians there. Now when the East Indian Christian marriage is, one of the most important, one of the important components of an East Indian marriage is they will give a Mangal Sutra. The husband will actually put a Mangal Sutra around the wife. Now, East Indian Christian, it is the marriage is the church, but they will put a Mangal Sutra. So I think, yes, there is a lot of still this Zoroastrianism is followed there, and I think today it is more, the opposition to that is a little moderate than the initial days after Ayatollah had taken sort of reins over the country. I think during the Shah of Iran period before that, Iranian society was very, very modern. And when you're talking about Shah of Iran, I just want to tell you a small thing. I showed you the akhada or the gym, what is that, wrestling place in Iran. Now, the initial wrestlers came from the Pahlavi dynasty, on which the Shah of Iran is. And that is why the word Pahalwan. So even our Hindi word Pahalwan actually comes from that. So I think, yes, until and unless someone really does go there, talk to people, or even correspond with them on some media, some maybe letters or emails, commenting on this would be a little off the mark.
Thank you so much.
But the Iran Shah is the eternal flame. Is the temple is still there, and there are prayers 5 times a day. So all that is happening.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Malyaji, for that quite informative talk. So I assume there are no more questions, and I'm going to hand it over to Mirasi's founder director, Ms. Neha Matre, to deliver the closing address.
Thank you, Pranav. Am I audible?
Yes, you are. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, I believe that all of you had a wonderful evening with Team Mirasi. We have had individuals from all parts of India today. Let me begin by thanking you, Mr. Malia, for your excellent dialogue. Pranav and Team Mirasi for smoothly pulling this off. Soham for technical help. I would like to express my appreciation to all participants for taking time out of your duties to attend this event. A special thank you to His Royal Highness Jitendra Singh Gaikwad from Baroda, Captain Kapil Dev Bal, Dr. Zareen Setna, and Dr. Usha Vijayalakshmi. Thank you. It has been a precious experience to have this healthy dialogue and discussions in here today. I assure you that we will continue this journey on our social media handles, and also we would be conducting talks every month, and I hope to see you all participating. I sincerely hope that this association which we have developed goes a long way. Mirasi needs enthusiasts like yourselves to support us in our ventures and bring forward legacies and heritage.